Welcome to Somerset Showcase. Today we are here with someone who currently is living on her boat down at the Bristol Marine, but she's been all over the world on her boat. And thank you for joining us, Donna Lange.
Thank you.
So, can you tell me, how do you you've been around you've sailed around the world twice. Tell me how you first decided you wanted to do that.
Well, sailing came to me as a gift. I was 40. I had been through some traumatic experiences, and I was a really good cook. I was a naturalist cook, and I could bake up a storm. So I ended up getting a job in Maryland on a tall ship as a cook. And my captain, she loved me. She never didn't have a cup of hot coffee in her hand, and the fresh bread just solves everything. Everybody likes to wake up to the smell of fresh bread. So I ended up going to the Caribbean as a chef in the charter business. And while I was on the tall ship, my captain one day came down to the galley, and she said, "Donna, I would like for you to join me. I'm going to be doing the 2000, it was the Millennium, 2000 regatta around the world." And when she asked me to join her for that, all the bells and whistles just went off, and I was lit up like a Christmas tree. I just couldn't believe that I was going to have the opportunity. On the tall ship, we played music. I was learning to play Irish music, and we sang at night, and I had just met this wonderful community of people. So, and I had a family. I had grown children. They were in their teens, and but they were old enough, and they were with their dad, finishing up Ptarmigan. My oldest was in college. I mean, they were older. So I decided I wanted to do this amazing thing. A few weeks later, she comes down into the galley, and she tells me that the gentleman who was delivering the boat put it aground and destroyed the keel of the boat, and the trip was off. But I'll tell you, it lit a fire. And so when I got to the Caribbean as a charter captain, I rented a boat first, a sailboat, brought my boys down, and I decided I was going to buy a sailboat. And sailing, I didn't know how I was going to do it, but at the time, being alone was the thing that felt most comfortable for me. So I decided to learn to sail it solo, and I was going to gallivant around the world sailing. Wow. Playing music, because I had become a professional musician in the islands. Playing my guitar, I learned to play all kinds of different instruments. And so I started the sailing by just challenging myself sailing around the islands. So I went to South America for a season, and then decided to take off, and ended up sailing around the North Atlantic. But after sailing to Ireland, I was offshore for a month. It was during that time that I realized that it wasn't long enough for me to figure out what was wrong with me. There was something wrong with me in my mind, and I was. Turns out that I'm an Asperger's kid, and when you don't understand how you tick and what makes you work, it can be really, really difficult, because I asked a lot more of myself than I was capable of, and then you end up I became somebody I didn't like. So I started the sailing, and that's, I ended up sailing halfway around the world. The first trip, 6 months offshore, and then the second time around I was 8 months. I wasn't able to become the first U.S. American woman, to sail around the world solo, because I didn't make it around Cape Horn, but I did spend 8 months offshore, and I did it with just going through the Panama Canal.
Now, how big a boat was this?
My boat, well, if you look at this room, this room's probably 30 feet, one end to the other, and my boat's a 28-foot. And it's a double-ender, which means it's a big canoe. It resembles and is the same size as the vessels that people row across the oceans. People who do the row thing, their boats are about the same size, 28 feet. But of course mine it's a monohull, so it's a little more roomy.
I mean, when you're doing a trip like that, what do you pack?
What do you pack? That's a question. Interestingly enough, the thing that was the first time around the world, 6 months really wasn't that long It sounds like a long time, but I was able to keep plenty of what I needed. But I packed canned food. Well, canned food didn't cut it. It rusted out, and I lost huge amounts of my food. And I was actually a bit skinny and a bit hungry when I got to New Zealand on that trip. The second trip, it's something I learned in New Zealand, I packed a lot of dried food. But dried food meant I needed a lot of fresh water. So I had a little trouble with fresh water, but I did. I packed mostly all dried food, dried vegetables, soup stock kind of things, and I had the most wonderful dried fruit. I had every kind of fruit you could imagine dried: pineapples, mangoes, cranberries, and cherries, and blueberries. It was wonderful. So I ate well on my second trip around the world. I still got skinny, but that, and the interesting part is the clothing, because everywhere I was sailing, interestingly enough, was quite cold, because I left late in the season. Well, not actually, I didn't. On the second trip around the world, I purposed to go around the North Atlantic following the trade winds, which was longer, but it meant that I stayed north and in some warmer territory for a little bit longer. But once I got down into the South Atlantic, and certainly in the Southern Ocean from Cape Hope to Cape Horn is 11,000 miles.
Oh.
So that was a good solid 4 months for me, 5 months. So, and it was cold because because I knew how long it was going to take me. I left really early. So when I got down around Cape Hope at the lower latitudes, it wasn't terribly low. Africa isn't actually that far south at the base. But it was way into winter. It was way early spring for that part of the world, because of course the Southern Ocean has the opposite seasons that we do up in the north. So it was still really cold, and that was so keeping clothes dry was really hard. And God forbid they get salty. They don't dry very well once they get salt watered. So that was a challenge, but I had learned through all my sailing. I've had packs. I had one for every 2 weeks that I planned to be out of layers of t-shirts, undershirt, long, stretchy pants, of this layering of clothing. So every 2 weeks I had a fresh set. So I had 20 packs that were tucked away in the boat, and so it was a bit of a thing, but I had learned over all the years of doing it, and it worked quite well. And then the other thing, water was a challenge because I had a 50-gallon tank, so I planned a half a gallon a day. That's 100 days, and I had an additional bladder of water, and I had some 1-gallon jugs and stuff all over the boat. But I did run low on water, and interestingly enough, in the Southern Ocean, you don't get very many rainstorms. The wind is either blowing like stink, and it's 45, and the water is all horizontal and not very apt to be captured, or it doesn't rain. So yeah, I only had the intercoastal zone. There's an area between the North and South Atlantic. It's kind of where the two oceans meet, going opposite directions, and it's an interesting place in the world. And right there's always storms, and there's a lot of good low wind rain. So, but that's only twice around the world that you run into those areas. So I had some magical moments of rainstorms that appeared out of nowhere, or this and that. And a lot of 24/7, inching every little bit of water I could. I'd collect it on the sail.
Okay.
And it would dump onto the deck, or I would put a bucket where the mast and the boom came together and collect it there. A lot of people today have water makers, but I didn't have one.
Did you run into any problems with storms?
Sure. Of course I did.
Yeah.
I had, they have a name for it. I'd never heard of it until I went sailing, but now they talk about it all the time, these meteorological bombs. When the pressure gradient changes dramatically in 24 hours. And I had two monstrous ones that I did in the Southern Ocean. And one One was in the basin south of Australia. The other was as I was coming out from having gone as far south as I went on the second trip around the world. The first trip around the world, I did get around Cape Horn. It does make me the fastest U.S. woman to sail around the world. But the second time I got below New Zealand, which is at about 50 degrees south. Cape Horn's at 56. And I was just coming back up, and there was this meteorological bomb coming, and the center of it was going to go right over me. And I ended up, to all the advantage sailing around the world distance-wise, and is getting south and being able to stay south. Because the distance between a longitude at the bulb of the Earth is 60 degrees. The distance between longitudes at 45 degrees, which is only halfway down, is only 38 degrees. And as you get to 50, it's like 33 degrees or something like that. So the distance to go around the world in the southern zone is dramatically smaller. And that's why all the world racers all head as far south as they can, go around the world down the bottom, and then come back up. So I had gotten down to 50 south and I wanted to stay down there, but this meteorological bomb came along and I scooted all the way back up to 40 south and ended up in some monster, what my weather router calls them, what did he call them? I'm not coming up with it, but they're monstrous oceans. They're 60-foot, 40-foot oceans, but they're big. They have a very gentle giants, he calls them, because they're these monstrous oceans of just mountains of water, but they're far apart and they don't break. So it's just this going up and then coming way back down, and my boat loved to sail those kinds of seas. But the initial storm, I rolled the boat and snapped the boom.
Oh.
So I did have to, after that it took a good week for the rest of the fronts to go by, and I devised I call it a boom box because it's for my boom, and it was a wooden box that I built to encapsulate the broken part of the boom. So it was a project, and so yes, I've done my fair share. On my way to Cape Horn, the conditions were wrong. Everything about it was wrong, and I was having trouble with my self-steering, and without the self-steering to power the boat up, I just couldn't get the boat moving. So it was, and I wasn't going to hand steer the boat. I can't hand steer around the world, you know. So I tried everything that I could, every technique sailing, and I rolled the boat a couple times and lost a lot of gear. I lost my communication system. I lost my wind generator, which was important for power, and my solar panel. And so I ended up deciding it was just wrong. Every time I rolled the boat, I could hear the mast making pressure on the deck of the boat. It was a deck step boat, and the first trip around the world, I actually had a compression post that I built to stabilize it. But before I left on the second trip, my son did a monstrous repair of the deck, and I figured it was going to be solid as a rock. I didn't think it was going to be an issue, but sure enough, it was creaking and making. I knew that sound. I knew that if I kept rolling the boat like that, the mast was going to come right through the deck. So I had no choice. I had to turn. So I went to the Panama Canal. So.
How much time was there in between your two trips?
Oh gosh, I did the first trip at 45, the second one at 55 or 54.
Okay, so
They're 10 years.
So about 10 years.
Yeah. So I started sailing in 2000, about 1999 to 2000. Bought my boat, I think at the end of 2000. Went to South America in 2001, and then by 2002 I was off to Ireland.
Okay.
And so my first sail around the world was in 2005.
Okay.
And the second one I left in 2015.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So yeah, by then you had had a lot more experience.
Sure, and I'd gotten
on
my
your
captain's
second-
license. I got my captain's license before even the first trip around the world. Because of my time on the tall ship, I was able to get a 100-ton license, which was a much better license. And I was doing deliveries. I was a captain. I worked for Sunsail. I did a charter company, and I took people on sails for a week, and I captained for them. So sure, I had a bit of experience at that point. So I'd done a fair number of storms, enough that when I was in Ireland, and I headed out then actually to go around the world because I wanted a longer trip, and I got hit in a big storm off the Bay of Biscayne, which is a classic spot for storms, and I realized then that my boat was not ready to go around the world, and that's why I went back to the Caribbean. I got my license, and so the refits I've done on my boat have been incredible. They've been massive. When I bought the boat, it turned out that the whole hull was delaminated. I had to basically shear off all of the first layers of glass, the gel coat and layers of glass, and I rebuilt it. So my boat is built out of epoxy, which is not a 1982. 1982, they didn't build boats out of epoxy, but my hull is on, at least the stern of the boat is all epoxy, and it's all built with biaxial cloth, which is much different than what they build boats with generally. It's a much stronger fabric. It's a woven, stronger fabric to build a boat out of. So my boat was stout. I had rebuilt everything, and I had done it myself. My ex-husband, when I was married, at 16, he was a boat builder, and so I worked in his shop, and I learned how to use tools, and I learned about epoxy and fiberglass. I was the perfect person to take on sailing a boat. I was actually I always, when I'm talking with young people, I always tell them that I learned everything that I needed to know to sail around the world in primary school and secondary school, because it's the basics. I took shop and I learned about basic electricity back then when I was a kid, and I just learned everything I could. I was pretty smart, and it all came in handy. I was an athlete, so I was a trainer. Taught aerobics and all that kind of thing. So I was the right person. It's people will say, well, I could never do that. And I'm like, you're right, you can't do that. Because I was quite uniquely prepared, and I didn't do it on purpose. It's not to say I'm something special. It was just what I had become by the time I was 40 years old. I was a fitness guru, and I was the right person to get on the sailboat and sail around the world.
Now, where are some of the more interesting places you visited when you did this?
Well, I didn't stop a lot. So it wasn't so much, I certainly being in Ireland for a year, I played Irish music, and I had a ball with people in Ireland. I had so much fun. I bussed on the street to make money. I had no money. And you can't stop along the way if you don't have any money. Every time you stop, it's very expensive. Every time you fix something that's broken, you either learn to live without it, or if you try to fix it, it's very expensive to fix things. So I learned to live without things for the most part. Ushuaia, certainly going up the Beagle Channel into Cape Horn. Around Cape Horn was just breathtaking. If there's a place in the world I would go to again, it would be there. And I went by the Falkland Islands, and the whole time I'm sailing by it, I'm on the radio with people on land there on the SSB. I had a long distance radio, and I was able to talk with them, and they were like, oh, you've got to come to Falkland Islands. Oh, we'll set you up to play music, because people had heard about me. People on the radio, the long distance radio, kind of keep in touch. So there's what they call a cruising net, they call them, and they are times every morning when cruisers in an area can get on the same station on the radio, on the SSB radio, which is a single sideband, and they can hear people talking about wherever they are sailing, whatever they're doing, all around in the area of the world where they live. And in fact, you can oftentimes get radio communications from quite far away. I had gone around Africa, and I was still able to get a weather report from the fellow that was helping me in Florida, and I'm 10,000 miles away, and I'm able to still connect with them by radio. It was rare that I could get them, but could occur. So in Patagonia, there was a very strong net of people that hung out on the radio and interacted. So these people from Falkland Islands had heard me checking in, so they were, and I didn't stop there. So that's where I would go back to. The one place in the world I still want to go to is the Falkland Islands. The wildlife is just overwhelming. It's so beautiful. The birds, and I interacted with whales. Well, actually, they look like large dolphins, but they probably were killer whales. seals, cormorants. It was just unbelievable to be with the wildlife. There were lots of areas of the world where I went months without seeing a single thing other than the birds. So I became very, very tight-knit with my albatrosses, little stormy petrels, and there were lots of other petrels too. There was lots of petrels. I even saw the storm petrel, which is particular to the Cape of Good Hope in south of Africa. And I actually kept a log, and I sent off information to Birding Aboard, which is an organization that collects information. I did research. I did research on sargasso weed, because the sargasso weed had a monstrous bloom the year that I was going around the world. It's become quite dramatic with the change in the temperatures of things. And so I ended up in a football field size mat of 1 foot deep sargasso weed out there. Little did I know that it was really quite a phenomenon. So I sent some information to a friend of mine who's just very, she's a brilliant woman, and she connected with people that were doing research on it. And I was able to send pictures. And so it was interesting. And I also did some Geiger count too. Joan made sure that I had a Geiger counter to do baseline radiation numbers, and all the numbers came out to be pretty unremarkable where I had sailed. But after the incident in Japan, there was a lot of radiation issues. And so I was part of research kind of tracking how far that went. So I did quite a few interesting things on my second trip.
Yeah.
So.
Can you tell me a little bit about your music that you were just talking about?
I music has been the balm of my life. As an Asperger's kid, one thing you can do is focus and do something alone for a long period of time, which is why I was able to sail around the world alone. And it's when Steve and I talked earlier, my personality, you're so outgoing, how can you be somebody that just wants to be alone so much? Because I can, that's part of my personality. And music was just the thing that it gave me so much peace. And when you're a child that is afraid, you have a lot of internal emotional instability, and you're just frightened by things. You're tenuous. I didn't know what they were at the time, of course, and neither did my parents or anybody else back in the 60s. But, you're having panic attacks, cry through holidays. It was interesting. Music was the thing that it soothed me. And I loved to sing. So it was first singing, and then I bought a guitar. It was the first thing I ever bought for myself when I was 16. And it just has been that for me for my whole life. I started writing music. I have written hundreds of songs. I have 4 CDs of music that have been produced. 2 of them with like real jackets, and they look like professional CDs. The other 2 were less professionally done. But I've written a lot of music and played it everywhere in the world. So it's interesting when you meet the world with an instrument in your hand. It is such an incredible opening to having a very amazing experience with people, because you don't go in there I'm never really as a guest. I'm not there as a tourist by any stretch. I'm there as somebody who is intimately wanting to be a part of their culture. So I adapted all of my instruments. When I was in Ireland for a year, I adapted everything I played to Irish music, because I played the tin whistle. I played tunes, and I know waltzes, and I know beautiful songs on the tin whistle. So I took them and I put them on the steel pan, because I played the Caribbean steel drum, with that amazing, lively, bright, happy sound. And people just loved it. They loved to hear their music on the instruments. So it wasn't like I went in there and saying, trying to interject my music, which I did. Most of these places loved folk music, so they enjoyed my songs because they're just folky kind of music. But they really enjoyed hearing their own music. on my instruments, and my adapting my instruments to their music. So I was improvisational. I could play along with anybody. Between playing the harmonica, I've got lots of keys, and most of the time, the steel drum was wonderful for that, because the steel drum is chromatic, which means you can play in any key. I just had a wonderful time. It was an amazing experience being able to play with people.
So you play folk music?
I call it folk music, sure.
Yeah.
And it's not. I can be kind of jazzy. As I've gotten older, I've lost my upper range, and so I sing lower. I actually tune my guitar a whole tone lower, so that I can still sing and play my songs that I wrote that I no longer can reach the notes for. It's folk music. It really is. It just tells stories. It's just storytelling with a guitar in your hand.
Yeah. And you have your
this is a ukulele.
Ukulele.
Yep, the ukulele. The ukulele is wonderfully packable, and I started to play it. I have arthritis, like everybody getting older, and playing my guitar is not as easy for me as it used to be. So it's just a fun thing to carry around, and I can take it on an airplane. I can take it anywhere, and always have it. All of my kids, I have 12 grandchildren, and all of my kids have ukuleles in their homes. So when I've gone there, I've left them ukuleles, and different ones putter around with it, because it's an easy instrument to learn to play. But it's a lot of fun. It puts a different sound to things. It has a wonderful sound. So there are some songs I've written specifically on the ukulele. So it lends another sound. It makes it diverse, and when I go and play gigs, it's kind of fun. Have all the instruments up on the stage, and people have fun with me.
Now, you said these trips around the world were like healing experiences for you. Can
Yes.
you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, I was raised Catholic, and I went through so many things that hurt me so much as a child, and then made decisions that were not exactly Catholic. And I kind of rebelled against God, but it was literally a rebellion against God himself. I never blamed anyone in my world, not my ex-husband, not anybody, for the way I was and the challenges that I had inside. I knew that it was just blamed God. What is going on? I can't figure it out. I don't know how to maneuver through life. I was a hard worker, and I never stopped working. I was smart, and I did everything myself. But there were some character flaws. And then after this car accident that I initiated, I was coming home from work as a nurse. I wasn't drinking. There was nothing. It was an accident. But it had terrible outcomes. And I was just so angry. And I couldn't unleash the anger. And it turned out that sailing around the world was a place that I was alone with God. It was just me and God. It had to be. It was the only place I could figure out what is the matter with me. It was funny. We were doing a presentation in Florida on a little island out there, Usepa. And a woman, we were at lunch, and I'm talking like sailing around the world is a normal thing. And she looks at me and she says, "What is the matter with you? Like, don't you realize that what you're saying is not normal?" And I've adopted that. I really didn't know what was wrong with me. And it took the first trip around the world. I started to unlayer the onion, spent a lot of time screaming, yelling, crying. I just did a lot of that. I was just very, very angry. When I got to Ireland, I met people that were meditative and quieted, and I started reading other kinds of books. So I was studying. I was just studying and researching the whole time. And that's why I wanted to go farther than a month offshore. But my boat wasn't ready, and then I got it back, and I got ready, and I decided to go halfway around the world because I knew that my boat was small. I didn't think I could get below the 2 capes in one season, which I couldn't. So the second time around the world I tried, and I wasn't successful. But the first trip, I unlayered a lot, but when I got to New Zealand, I went to on my way to Cape Horn, I ended up getting involved in a rescue of Ken Barnes, another sailor who had rolled his boat, lost his mast, and needed to be rescued. And at that point, no one in the world knew I was sailing around the world. I was just doing it for my own needing to do it. I had a friend, an older gentleman, retired publicist, who was kind of helping, trying to put my story out there. And some people knew I was out there, but not anybody, not any mainstream. After this rescue, all of a sudden the whole world knew that I was out there. And my sat phone started buzzing with BBC, with MSNBC, and all kinds of people wanting to hear about my story. And that actually set me back a huge amount, because I wasn't healed at that point. I wasn't ready to talk about it. And it actually made me, it brought back all of the negativity, all of the anger, and all of the frustration. So I didn't actually accomplish my goal on the first trip around the world. And that's why 10 years later, I was still struggling emotionally. I had met the love of my life. I had everything. There was nothing wrong with my life. I had a good job, and yet I was just undone. And that's when I decided to sail around the world nonstop and try to write a book. And it wasn't until I got back from that trip that I actually did the research. It was as if I met God out there. I didn't know what I was going to meet. I really didn't. I wasn't wanting to meet Jesus. I wasn't wanting to meet God necessarily on any particular religious term. I didn't like religion. I still don't like religion. But I did. I did. And at Christmas time, I actually met Jesus. Because there was just nothing else that made sense to me. God had to come to earth as a man in order for anything to be right in my mind. That's just my mind. So, those things, they got settled, and then over the course of the trip, still was just very angry. And it wasn't until I got back that I started to read about savants, and I didn't even know that Asperger's was a word. I'd heard of autism, but I'd never heard of Asperger's. I didn't have any concept. And I just researched neuroscience and everything, and finally came down to figuring myself out in terms that made sense. And then I had a bit of a healing, and at a healing service, is whatever people want to think about that. And I've been free. I'm a free woman, free from my emotions, free from the anger. I'm a happy woman. But it's taken 60 years. So.
Did you write the book?
The book is down to 600 pages, and I cannot get an editor to even touch it. Oh, it's too long. It's too long. They should talk to David McCullough. David McCullough writes long books, and we all read them. Some people write a longer book. No, my book it desperately needs editing. It's not written, but it's all there, and I just have to get another. Last year, I took 2.5 months, and I went up to New York to visit my children and my mother. And I lived alone. I got an apartment, and I stayed up there just for the purpose of trying to write the book, because I needed to be alone. I had to be able to focus from the morning until night and organize my life around writing this book. And I did tremendous work. I got the book way down in numbers. But it's still got another big edit to go before it's going to be, and I really haven't found the right editor, somebody that's interested in helping me to sift through it and get the story to flow, so.
But you have a podcast?
I have a blog.
A blog. Okay.
I have a blog. And part of the problem with editors is they say that anybody that ever does blogging can't ever be a book writer, because blogging and book writing have nothing in common. Because a blog is a once a day kind of short story, and you just can't take all those short stories and put them into a connected story. But I have a wonderful blog. It's people who did follow it the second time around the world. I had a few thousand people watching, and people who really read the blogs, they really had a great time. They enjoyed being with me along the way, and that's how they felt. They were with me on the trip along the way, and it was great fun for them.
What would you say were the biggest things you learned through doing that?
Learned. I think I've always been somebody that, because of my own makeup, I've always been a very, I don't know if humble's the right word. I can't judge anybody else because I'd be judging myself I'd be judging myself so hard, you know. And I think going through the process of sailing, it's really led to my understanding a bit about humanity and about the way people and humans forge their way through life. I love to read history. Right now, Bob and I are doing The Men Who Built America, the Frontiersmen, you know. And it's just fascinating to see how somebody's personality and somebody in a specific point in time can forge the kinds of changes that happen in humanity around the world. And I think that the greatest thing I've come to understand is the human spirit. And I understand mine. It was very driven. It's not like people think I didn't do anything because I wanted to do it necessarily. And I was willing to live without for the purpose of my deeper need to know and understand and grow. It's very, it has brought peace because I have, I think, a great capacity to care and love people because I can understand them to some extent. I don't have to understand them, but I understand their own personal life and journey, or their own personal journey, because I had such a very dramatic one in my world and the way I've seen it, and it's been quite a trip. That it sure has.
Would you do this again?
You know, I would. I just sailed my boat up from Florida to bring it up here, and I have the intention of selling my boat because I am not physically as capable as I was. I have issues, and I'm not staying in nearly the kind of condition that you need to be to stay on the boat. Now, would if it was the thing I needed to do, I had to do, sure, I would sail around the world again. Because I don't doubt that I would figure it out and that somehow I would make it to the other end, because I always make it to the other end. And that's just the kind of, if you put yourself out there, what are your options? To die? I don't think so. You know, and I have to say I was given permission to sail around the world in some sense, because there could have been, there's plenty of instances that would have been situations that I couldn't have recovered from, and they never occurred. I was always able to find the leak. I was always able to stop the boat from sinking. I was able to roll the boat without losing everything. I had taken kites, so if I lost the mast, I had a way to keep propelling myself, and I had a flotation system installed on the boat, so if the boat was sinking, I was able to inflate bags in the boat so that the boat would not sink. I mean, I had gone to great extent. I had 11 grandchildren. I wasn't out there to die. I was out there to succeed at whatever cost, but I wasn't going to make some emergency person come out and rescue me. That wasn't my idea, that they would be risking their lives. So I made my boat's a really seaworthy boat, and it had all the gear it needed to have to make sure that I was successful and didn't die along the way. It was, I did my homework,
Yeah, I would think you would have to. For a trip
I did
like that.
There's a quote, and it's not my quote, I did a talk in a school, and it was written up on the wall that knowledge plus challenge equals growth. And I stand on that firmly, because you've got to have the knowledge. If you work hard and get the knowledge and you make sure that you know as much as you can, then when the challenge comes, you have a chance of growing. And it goes both ways. Challenge without knowledge doesn't work, and knowledge without challenge doesn't work. Because you could have all the knowledge in the world, but if you've never tested, you never experience it, you never live it, you never push it, you're never going to get better. And my story is basically I was willing to do the footwork, and I learned everything. And I put myself out in the middle of a challenge where I had no place to go but forward. And I grew. So.
Yeah, Bristol Marine up here, our Somerset business. Do they do a good job
Oh
of your
gosh,
boat?
they're fantastic. Andy Tiska is the I guess he's the CEO, or I don't know what his title actually is. He has supported me from when I first arrived back in 2007 for my first sail around the world. My publicist had gotten in touch with Andy, and Andy has been absolutely a supportive person. And the work they do in this particular yard, they're really craftsmen. If you want something done right, and at a really, it's not that they're inexpensive, but they're reasonable. You know, it costs something to get a lot of work done on your boat. We spend a lot of money there on Bob's boat, but great craftsman, unbelievable. He's got the best. He's got the best in the upholstery business. He's got the best when it comes to rigging and engineering. He's got a fantastic mechanic group, woodworkers. He is really a great team, and Chuck is an amazing manager. They're happy. You know, you love to go into a place where everybody stays. You know, when the employees that I saw 10, 15 years ago are still there, you know somebody's doing something right. And they're smiling, and they enjoy what they do. It's a great spot to be. It's become basically our home in New England when we bring our boat up. So we love the group there. So.
All right. Well, thank you for coming in and telling us your story about your trips around the world.
Tell a few stories.
Yes. So thank you for tuning in to Somerset Showcase. We will see you next time. Ha ha ha.